Hello travelers, and welcome back to another episode of the Architect's Forge. In this episode, we are continuing our look at Mounthaven with the folder, the caster, in the Mounthaven action pack. Let's start with a little bit of lore on our little origami friend. The folders are orichalcum smiths specialized in combat. Normally, these exceptional craftsmen take a good amount of time, sometimes even years, to finish one of their works, which makes their intervention in battle, beyond forging the equipment of their companions, unfeasible. But folders are experts at taking already prepared sheets of orichalcum and working with them quite quickly, folding them with a series of precise and purposeful movements. Thus, they manage to transform the very thin sheets of metal into beautiful shapes, capable of invoking the power of the spirit, or the elemental force contained within them. The strength and dexterity of their hands, and the intuitive understanding they have of magical energy, means that few orichalcum smiths can master the technique of the folders. And that folding is, as we sometimes like to call them, making them the Origami Wizards, folding their sheets of orichalcum into shapes like the bear in the model that we got, or the owl that her abilities invoke, or, of course, the Warcrow Adventures one, where he is making a fox. But having read about who they are, we'll jump into what they are like on the table. But before I do that, just a quick reminder that if you're enjoying this content or the other content on the channel, please remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Helps me know you're watching and also lets the algorithm, help other people find the channel as well. If you are interested in supporting the channel financially, there is a link to a Buy Me a Coffee in the description below. Or if you're going to be ordering something from the Corvus Belly store, there is an affiliate link as well in the description that if you use it when you're ordering something from the store, for example, the bundle for the Mounthaven, well, then the channel gets a bit of a kickback from the store. But with that, let's jump into the folder on the table, because they are, in my mind, one of the more interesting casters that we've gotten in the game so far. But before we get into what makes them interesting, let's look at their stats. They come in at a nice low cost of 20, which makes them a lot easier to add to the list than some of the more expensive casters from other factions that are, 25, 30 points, etc. As can be expected of most casters, she is a support, which she can't join a unit anyways, so it has a lot less meaning. She is a dwarf, so we see the classic dwarf 2/2 with 8 charge, which is to be expected. She's really not going to be moving fast, but that's okay. One thing that does make her interesting is she is 3 wounds, which for a cheap caster is, I think, unheard of. They're almost all 2 wounds, so she has that nice dwarven toughness and is a bit more durable. She has a pretty good whip of 2 orange, which will make her cast fairly reliable to get off, and unlike most of her dwarven counterparts, is actually 2 morale, so if you do want to activate her multiple times, you can. Like most other casters in the game, she is availability 1, so you're only going to bring 1 of her, which I think you probably wouldn't bring 2 anyway, so it's not a big deal. She does have the Dispel of 2 blue dice keyword and Spellcaster, which means that now she can, cast her spell, she can block other casters, and if she herself is targeted, she can use the 2 blue dice instead of the 3 black. Realistically, if you are being targeted, you probably do want to use the 2 blue dice to spell. The 2 blue dice have a better average successes or blocks than 3 blacks, and you don't risk gaining tinge. Sadly, she brings no conquest, but again, this is a 20-point caster. You can't really expect her to be bringing conquest. Before we get into the interesting part of her card, we'll quickly go over her attack and defense. On attack, she has a red and an orange, which averages 1.75 hits. It's a bad attack, don't really bother, but interestingly enough, it actually does have a higher average hits than our friend the Keeper of the Sacred Fire, who we also said probably don't want to bother attacking with. In defense, she has a green, a blue, and a black, which averages 1.63 blocks, which is actually a fine defense. I wouldn't rely on it. Like, realistically, you don't want her to be hit. But for a caster, that's actually fairly durable. Green, blue, black, and 3 wounds is probably one of the more defensive casters in the game, outside of maybe some of the more heavily armored feudum casters. Overall, attack and defense are very bare bones, just a few dice in each, no stresses, no switches. They're really not what you're here for. Speaking of what you're here for, let's get into the Folder's skills and abilities, and starting with her spell, Summon the Spirit of the Orichalcum. This spell will allow you to target an ally within 12 strides. It'll have a 4-turn duration. There are no alterations. And essentially, it allows you to attach an origami enhancement to a given unit, either the owl or the bear. You do get to choose the stance at this point. So there is a bit of thinking forward, but we'll get to it. But that, you can adjust it during the duration of the spell itself. Lasting 4 turns is a solid length of time. 5 would have been nicer, but hey, at least it's not 3. 4 is a good amount of turns in the game. It is the bulk of a single round, so the buff will stay on your unit for a decent amount of time. It is interesting that there are no alterations available on the spell, and I think that might be to capture the fact that the folders aren't really using magic in the same way as the casters from the other kingdoms, and that their casting isn't as linked to things like the tinge. So it makes sense that she doesn't have the same way of altering her spells by pushing and letting that tinge in. Now, she still can take a tinge to add a success to her roll. They didn't say she can't do that, but tinge is very much not as much of a thing in their lore. Now, before we look at her second skill, I just want to quickly jump away and look at what these enhancements, these origami enhancements are. And yes, I had to use the origami transition for the folder because why not? So the first we'll look at is the bear. The bear, first off, adds an orange to your attack, which is essentially 0.63 hits, or half a special and a quarter or 0.25 hollow specials. And that hollow special is important for the switch that the bear adds, which for a hollow switch, you do get to place yourself 3 engaged with your target. So it does help you move around, which will help you with angling for pushbacks, but you do need to stay engaged with your target. An interesting about this is you do... it doesn't say you need to start engaged with a target, although the odds are when you're at the switch stage you should be. But if for some reason something happens and you aren't, this still allows you to place yourself. So it's adding some extra damage and then giving you that positioning, and it's really a positioning for pushback, and that's because of the part of the bear, the first passive, the charge of the bear. And this is when you're resolving a combat that you are participating in, when you push back the defeated unit. So it's assuming you win. If you win and you're pushing them back, you may increase the pushback distance by 2 strides. The second part of the passive is that when you push the defeated unit, you may just displace to engage with it instead of moving your first move value. Now, this is important because it helps deal with the issue of slow dwarves staying engaged when pushing back, because since you move 2 and most enemies move faster, if the leader of the enemy unit isn't the one that's engaged with your leader, just because of positioning, without abilities like this, it'll be a lot more common that when a dwarf wins combat and pushes the enemy back, they won't be able to follow up into them. So this gets rid of that problem. It helps get your opponent further from the objective or wherever they are, and it lets you make sure that you can be with them and that you can place them to change the angle that you're pushing them. That place switch could allow you to charge into somebody, get the switch, place to the other side of them, and then shove them back towards the rest of your line to maybe have a bunch of your units gang up on them. So Charge the Bear, think of it as the offensive origami, It's a lot more about aggression and, charging in and pushing people back. It does have a passive called New Folds that allows you to switch the enhancement from the bear to the owl at the beginning of your activation, which is nice because it essentially means that the unit with the enhancement will always be in the stance they want when they're doing their activation, so you can really tailor it to what your needs are in the moment. You don't need to necessarily predict it, turns in advance when you first cast the spell. The second enhancement is the owl. The owl is the more defensive form. The owl, instead of adding an orange to attack, adds a blue to defense, which is another, essentially half a block, and it also has a 0.5 specials. Now that special is important because you get this very strong switch of one special lets you place yourself 3, and it doesn't have the place yourself 3 if you're engaged. You can just place yourself 3. This is a very strong switch because specials are fairly easy to come by a lot of the time. And this can just allow your unit to really move around the battlefield. It's also important to note that if you place yourself so that you are no longer engaged in combat, if you lose combat, you don't get pushed back anymore because at the pushback step you are no longer engaged, so it doesn't happen. This can allow you to lose a combat and still stay on an objective, avoiding being pushed back without having to spend stress, which if you only have 1 stress and lost combat, so have no room to stress to stay engaged and not get pushed off the objective, this becomes very powerful. The no limit is especially good because if you, for example, rolled 3 specials and you don't have something else to use them on, now you can just place yourself 3 times. You can really start covering a lot of distance, remembering that essentially you get to add the size of your base on each of those places. So essentially you're 5 strides closer to the direction you're heading every time you place. So very good defensive bonus when you're buffed by the owl. Now we're getting into the actual ability you get from the owl, and that is a skill. You gain the skill Beat the Wings, which just lets you place yourself 10, which is a very far place for a slow army. This is the same as the jet propulsion boots on the raiders, and really you're able to just get a long distance. This is further than your charge of 8. This means you can engage an enemy that is 12 strides away from you. Notably, it also lets you engage or disengage. You can use this to get into an attack, into engagement and attack somebody with your second action. This can let you jump out of a combat with an enemy and into combat with a different enemy and then attack them. It also allows you to It's effectively a charge without the need for rerolls, without getting rerolls, without needing to worry about things getting in between you, and you don't need line of sight. So, for example, if you have a unit buffed by the owl and they are on one side of a impassable line of sight blocking piece of terrain, they could start their activation, use Beat the Wings to engage an enemy on the other side of the line of sight block, and say it's a giant high wall. They could place themselves to be engaged with the enemy unit, attack them with their second action, and then if they get attacked back, if they get attacked back by an enemy, then if they get a special, they can just teleport back to the safe side of the wall, preventing themselves from being attacked by maybe another enemy afterwards. So, very strong mobility enhancement. You also still get the new folds to be able to switch to the bear if you wanted. So let's say you start your activation, maybe you put yourself in blue in the owl when you first put the folder down because you're adding a defensive boost to that unit. So until they activate and want to attack and get that orange die, you're at least giving them a defensive bonus. So I do think you probably will owl first most of the time because of that. But then, let's say you start that way and then that unit activates and you're like, I need to hit harder. I need to displace that unit. Let's switch to the bear so you can still do that. So those are the 2 different enhancements, the owl and the bear. But the folder does still have one other skill on their card, and that is the Memory of the Orichalcum. And this allows you to target an allied unit within 12 strides that is enhanced by the owl or the bear. So essentially the unit that you put the owl or the bear onto. And it's a simple ability, but a very powerful one. That target just performs an action, either a simple or a long action. So you do need to be within 12 strides of them. But effectively what you're doing is you're trading the folder's second action to the enhanced unit, and then that enhanced unit gets used in action, and on top of it, it can be long action, which means they could charge or assault. So what you could do is have the folder go. If this is all assuming she starts in range of a unit. She could go. She could cast her spell, give a unit for, let's say, the bear, and then that unit, and then for her second skill, if she doesn't need to move, which, she's not adding conquest to a point, she doesn't want to be moving up and getting near the fight. So realistically, a unit can probably make a better use of her second action than she can. So now she's able to say, okay, I gave you that bear thing. I don't need my second action. I'm going to use my second action to tell you to charge into that enemy, and then, push them off a point. So it is pretty strong. It gives you a form of action compression without having to without activating. So essentially that other unit is getting a charge potentially or a movement without them having to activate, and therefore wasting, making it so they might need to spend stress to do so and things like that. So this is a very good ability. A lot of the time support casters, either they're moving and casting, or if they're in range to cast already, they're casting and then usually sitting there saying, well, I don't really have anything to do with my second action. The folder can just be like, do you know what? That other unit can use it better than me. Let them do something. If you were to give the unit like the owl, for instance, you could even just have them then use the wing skill to fly and place themselves 10 and get further up the board. So yeah, no matter what, is a very strong ability if your folder doesn't need to be using their second skill, or more likely didn't have to move to cast the spell in the first place. But that is the folder. There's, it's a fairly concise card. Fairly straightforward, but it's very unique and interesting design, and a different feel of caster than I think we've gotten with the other factions, and as this cool little enhancement feature, another thing to attach to your cards, which I do like. I think both of the enhancements are strong and interesting. The bear is clearly more offensive and useful for, getting enemies off of points and making sure you can stay engaged if you want. Whereas the owl is, obviously the more defensive one, and also much more mobility focused. Whereas the bear is about hitting enemies, pushing them to where you want to be. The owl is more about getting you to where you want to be. I think likely the owl will be the stance of choice most of the time. Its main things are both helping with movement, and Mounthaven, one of their largest weaknesses seems to be their relative lack or slow movement. So anything that is providing a nice buff to movement is probably going to be what you want to do most of the times. But there will be, of course, times where I think you'll want to switch into the bear. So it is nice that you're able to. As I kind of was saying before, casters usually really care about their spell. And that's about it. So being able to give the enhanced unit her second action is helpful just to boost the action efficiency that you have in your list, right? Every, outside of things that give bonus actions or bonus activations, over the course of a standard game, you get 15 activations, which is effectively 30 actions, counting long actions as 2. You really don't want to be wasting them doing nothing, so that she can just, if she doesn't need her second action, just give it to her target is just really, really handy, and it just helps boost the action efficiency. The other thing that you can do with it is, let's say your combat units are all at max stress, but your caster isn't. What you could do is activate her, move her in range of the, stress capped unit that is enhanced, and then she can just have that unit attack even though they are at stress cap. So a lot of cool things you can play around with it, and I'm excited to see her. I think when she is on the battlefield, you'll need to be careful where you put her, because I think a smart player will try and target and remove her fairly quickly. So just keep that in mind while fielding her. But those are my thoughts about the folder. I'd love to hear your thoughts about her and her model. I do love the model. The bear is so happy, and I love it. Although I am a bit sad that we didn't get the origami owl that we see in the picture on the screen. But With that, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and may the dice be ever in your favor.